Hello, it's the weekend of Saturday, June 17th and Sunday, June 18th. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, home of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with the UFO Headline News. So how about a few astronomy essentials for the weekend? The folks at earthsky.org serve this up. It gets a byline for Larry Sessions, and the headline is The Guardians of the Pole. Well, it's those two stars we talked about last week, Kochab and Pherkad. They're part of the famous Little Dipper asterism in that constellation Ursa Minor, the Lesser Bear. They mark the outer part of the cup or ladle of the Little Dipper, that part farthest from Polaris, the North Star. Kochab is designated officially as Beta Ursa Minoris, and Pherkad is Gamma Ursa Minoris. Their proximity to that famous Polaris might cause you to overlook them, but Kochab and Pherkad have their own claims to fame. But before we get to said claims, here's how to see them. Because they're so close to Polaris and the North Celestial Pole, Kochab and Pherkad can be observed every night of the year, even from the heavily populated areas of the Northern Hemisphere. Sometimes they can be seen as far south as Brazil, much of Africa, and far northern Australia. For northern observers, these stars can be seen at any hour of the night, any night of the year, but they're best seen when they're high overhead on midsummer evenings. Finding this pair is easy if you look first for the Big Dipper and then Polaris. Using the two outer stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper, you find Polaris, and that marks the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. Hang on, Kochab and Pherkad are in the bowl of the Little Dipper. Along with Polaris, Kochab and Pherkad are the only stars of Ursa Minor easily visible from most urban locations. Interestingly, these two stars were used in early times as a timepiece, circling steadily as they do around Polaris, just like the hands of a celestial clock. Although they appear close together in our sky, Kochab and Pherkad aren't related in any way in space. Kochab lies about 130 light-years distance, while Pherkad is nearly 4 times farther. That's about 480 light-years. Both are giant stars, larger and brighter than our sun, but they're not as hot as the sun. Kochab is roughly 40 times larger in diameter and 500 times more energetic. In fact, if Kochab was placed where our sun is now, it would extend halfway to the planet Mercury. There's a researcher, David Darling. He says that Kochab has exhausted its core supply of hydrogen, and he thinks it's an evolving orange giant star, possibly at that stage of helium burning. Pherkad's not as large. It's a mere 15 times larger than our sun, but because it's much more massive and hotter than our star, it pumps out energy at 1,100 times the rate. Actually, we should refer to it as Pherkad A, says Larry Sessions, to distinguish it from a nearby faint star, Pherkad B. These two aren't related gravitationally either, by the way. Pherkad B is barely visible to the unaided eye, even under very good dark sky conditions. Visually, Kochab is a magnitude 2.07, and Pherkad is more than twice as dim, just a magnitude 3. Both are easily seen from dark locations if you've got low light pollution. That's key. Now here's something about the history and mythology of Kochab and Pherkad. Since they continually circle around Polaris near that celestial North Pole, Kochab and Pherkad are often called guardians of the pole. The name Kochab, it's Arabic. It's derived from a title apparently referring to its nearness to the North Celestial Pole. And in fact, about 3,000 years ago, it was closer to the pole than Polaris. At times, Kochab and Pherkad were seen as two calves, because they keep as close to the pole as calves do to their mother. The name Pherkad, and by the way that's spelled Pherkad, appears to be derived from an Arabic term for calf. So there we go. So here's the bottom line. Kochab and Pherkad are part of that famous Little Dipper asterism in the constellation Ursa Minor, the Lesser Bear. It's the weekend. See if you can find time to get out there and take a look. Speaking of things of antiquity, Let's do a slight shift of geolocation now and go from ancient Persia and the stars to ancient Egypt, where Egyptian archaeologists just discovered 10 ancient royal tombs and mummies. This gets a byline for Sage Lazaro. She writes for The Observer. This is one of 2 short articles, very connected. In the history of Egyptology, so many ancient tombs have been located and identified that it was thought further finds would be rare. But during the first week of June, it was reported that a team of archaeologists just made a momentous discovery. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities has announced it has uncovered 10 previously hidden tombs. The tombs, which are located near the Aga Khan Mausoleum on the west bank of the Aswan, are from what is called Egypt's late period, meaning they're likely around 2,500 years old. Enter Nasser Salama. He's General Director of Aswan and Nubia Antiquities. He believes this newly found set of tombs could be part of something much bigger. He has evidence to believe they could be an extension of the West Aswan necropolis, which was discovered during the 20th century. It houses several royal Aswan tombs from the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. And what's more, these newly discovered tombs are quite similar to each other. Archaeologist Syed El-Rawi notes that they have similar architectural designs, which include staircases carved into the rock that leads to the entrance of the tombs. Just inside that entrance were simple rooms, several coffins, and mummies. Only preliminary details have been released by the ministry, and another excavation is going to be required. The team's next mission will be to study what's been discovered inside the tombs and carry out all the necessary conservation work. There's a slideshow you can flip through that's connected to this article. There'll be a link later at ufo-headline-news.com. And now for the companion piece, also with credit for Sage Lazaro, also The Observer. Egyptian archaeologists discover 2,500-year-old tomb with over 300 artifacts inside. Egyptian archaeologists uncovered 10 ancient royal tombs and even some mummies, and now another discovery into ancient Egypt has been made. Mahmoud Afifi, head of the Ancient Egyptian Antiquities sector of the Ministry of Antiquities, announced that finding. It's a Hellenistic tomb in the El Shatbi area in Alexandria. What's more, over 300 artifacts, including pottery vessels, a terracotta statue, and lamps made of clay, were found inside. The Hellenistic period refers to that time in ancient Greek and Mediterranean history between the death of Alexander the Great, that was in 323 BC, and the emergence of the Roman Empire in 31 BC. That makes this tomb at least 2,500 years old. The General Director of Antiquities of Western Delta and Alexandria, Mustafa Rushdie, explained that the tomb was dated based on its architectural style and the remains of the pottery they found inside. Here's just a snippet from that official announcement. Quote, Mustafa Rushdie said that the discovered tomb consists of 4 halls, each one of them with some burial holes decorated with colorful decorative elements and writings in ancient Greek, which showed funerary phrases, end quotes. Now, during the next archaeological season, this mission is going to study those funerary phrases and try to identify the owners of the tombs. We'll keep you posted. And for those of you gentle listeners who just can't get enough of pyramids, well, here are some more. But this time, well, here's the headline. This ancient Maya pyramid was destroyed to build a road. Alison McNerney writes this for the Daily Beast. If the road to hell is paved with good intentions, then the road to progress is paved with the destruction of ancient civilizations. Back in May of 2013, archaeologists in Belize were horrified to discover that a construction crew had gutted a major Maya archaeological site in order to use the pyramid stone for roadwork. While authorities were aware that a small amount of looting had taken place, they didn't realize the extent of the destruction until it was too late. The largest pyramid on the site of No-Mul, that's spelled Nohmul. It's also known as No-Mul, 2 words. It was the most important Maya site in Belize, now reduced to just a core of rubble. Over 3,000 years ago, the Maya inhabited a series of communities that encompassed much of the Yucatan Peninsula, right down to present-day Central America. Where the Maya people settled in villages and developed agricultural methods as early as 1500 BC, their civilization flourished from approximately 300 to 660 AD. During the height of their reign, they were one of the most advanced civilizations in the Western Hemisphere. In addition to building complex architectural settlements like that of No-Mul, the Maya were also known for advanced astronomy. Their discoveries were often fused with their architectural designs in incredible ways. They developed a system of written language and the creation of decorative arts. They invented the idea of the number 0 and developed many of the foods that modern-day urbanists couldn't imagine living without. Think chocolate, avocados, and coffee. No-Mul was built early in the Maya period in the northern region of what is now Belize on a limestone ridge overlooking the Hondo River. By the time the Maya were in the thick of regional domination, No-Mul had become a local hub of agriculture and commerce. The site originally encompassed around 12 square miles, but the center of community life was the Maya equivalent of a downtown, a central area where all the best temples and architectural features were housed, and a court where sports competitions were held. Historians believe No-Mul was home to around 10,000 people during its peak, and that by the time what was once largely an economically integrated community had become a divided one, eventually the poorer inhabitants settled in the agricultural outskirts, while the elite clustered near the main ceremonial center. And it was in this prestigious city center that the main pyramid of No-Mul was built early in the life of the village. There are plenty of other ceremonial mounds in those 2 areas that comprise the central hub. They were connected by an elevated walkway, but of course, they were small compared to this 60-foot main temple. Archaeologists are imagining now that this building was the spiritual and ceremonial center of the community, and that it probably contained multiple rooms, some used as tombs, others of which might have been occupied by important people in the village. Before the temple at No-Mul met its fate, it was one of the largest existing Maya pyramids in Belize. James Awe, he's the director of the Belize Institute of Archaeology, reflected on the significance of this. He pointed out that it was incredible, quote, just to realize that the ancient Maya acquired all this building material to erect these buildings using nothing more than stone tools. They quarried the stone, carrying the material on their heads, end quotes. But this heroic effort meant nothing to that construction company who set their sights on some free roadwork materials back in May of 2013. The main temple at No-Mul stood for nearly 2,300 years, surviving the relatively sudden and still debated decline of the Maya Empire in 1100. It withstood the invasion of European colonists and the rapid development that's occurred in modern times. But what it couldn't weather was one company's need for a shortcut to acquiring some quick and easy limestone. Despite national laws protecting archaeological sites such as this, No-Mul sits on privately owned land. While its historic contents were technically protected, the land itself was not. So, when a crew of bulldozers and backhoes moved in, they set about their nefarious deeds undetected for several days. By the time their actions attracted the attention of local archaeologists, it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Archaeologist John Morris told 7 News Belize, quote, "This is one of the worst that I have seen in my entire 25 years of archaeology in Belize. We can't salvage what's happened out here. It is an incredible display of ignorance," end quotes. James Awe had a much more visceral response, equating the discovery of the theft to, quote, "being punched in the stomach," end quotes. and continued to say, quote, "These guys knew this was an ancient structure. It's just bloody laziness," end quotes. The culprit turned out to be the DeMars Stone Company. It's a local construction company headed by a husband and wife team. The husband at one point had political ambitions. Despite their flagrant flouting of the law, even after archaeologists caught on to their misdeeds, and the continued denial of those owners that they were aware of what was going on, a Belize court brought charges against the responsible parties. During the subsequent trial, archaeologist John Morris testified that their actions had caused an, quote, "incalculable," end quotes, loss on the country, and the judge agreed. He found them guilty of 2 of the 3 charges. The judge was also willing to put a price tag on their crimes, and on April 24, 2016, the owners and their company's manager were fined a total of $24,000. And while they didn't get away scot-free, it's hard to imagine that this minimal sum serves as a deterrent for other company scavengers who might be thinking about doing that same thing. Belize has a history of archaeological theft, and limestone is a highly prized material when it comes to the construction of roads. After all, why take the time to quarry your own stone when you can just grab a dump truck and reap the benefits from the thousands of years old work of the Maya? And as for Nomul, the site is still an archaeological ruin, albeit one that is now more ruin than archaeological when it comes to the building that used to be its centerpiece. Rather than being a testament to the rich culture and advanced civilizations of the Maya, it holds a meaning of a different sort today, said Dr. Alan Moore, an archaeologist at the Institute of Archaeology. Quote, "It's a monument of ignorance, and unfortunately that's the way it is. Now we will probably have to look at this and say, this is a good example of what not to do," end quotes. Okay, so here's the part where we go off the beaten path even more. Let's transition from ancient civilizations to startup civilizations in space. Here's the headline: Space Nation Asgardia will launch a satellite this summer. This gets a byline for Dave Mosier, who writes it for Business Insider. There are some bullet points to begin with. A non-profit organization called Asgardia is trying to form the first nation in space. Asgardia, and that's spelled Asgardia, will launch a small satellite in the summer of 2017 as a means of establishing its presence in orbit. Hundreds of thousands of people have registered to become citizens and will soon vote on a constitution. However, experts are uncertain if Asgardia could become a nation, and it's unclear how it will fund or build that human space colony. The Space Kingdom of Asgardia has announced what might be a significant step towards becoming recognized as the first nation to orbit Earth. The founders of Asgardia, which is named after Norse mythology's city in the skies, hope to create a peaceful, spacefaring nation that mines asteroids and defends planet Earth from dangerous meteorites, space debris, and other threats. The existence of Asgardia was announced in October of 2016 and subsequently garnered hundreds of thousands of citizenship applications. For now, Asgardia is a non-profit, non-governmental organization based out of Vienna, Austria. The group aims to help its roughly 200,000 future citizens form a recognizable government, though many complex steps remain before Asgardia could ever become a real nation, if it ever does. The founding members said during a June 13th press briefing in Hong Kong they'll soon launch Asgardia-1, the proto-nation's first satellite. Quote, "The first presence of the Asgardian nation, we can now say, will be in space this year," end quotes. That's from Jeffrey Manber, the CEO of a satellite company called NanoRacks. Gentle listeners, you may be familiar with that. They also do contracts for NASA. NanoRacks was contracted to lead the Asgardia-1 project. And they said during the briefing that the satellite, quote, may turn out to be the most important and lasting idea that we're working with, end quotes. The spacecraft, well, it's a nanosatellite or a nanosat. It's going to be about half the size of a loaf of bread. It'll weigh about as much as a newborn baby and carry data uploaded by Asgardian citizens. This nanosat will launch aboard Orbital ATK's upcoming mission to the International Space Station on September 12, 2017, riding inside a cargo spacecraft that NASA has contracted to deliver supplies to astronauts in space. Once the spacecraft docks at the space station, the crew will pop Asgardia-1 inside a special nanosat dispenser and eject it into orbit. This effort is being bankrolled by Asgardia founding member Igor Ashurbeli, a Russian aerospace engineer and billionaire, and led in part by Ram Jaku, the director of McGill University's Institute of Air and Space Law. Here's a quote from Mr. Jaku. Asgardia will be a space nation that is trans-ethnic, transnational, trans-religious, ethical, a peaceful entity trying to settle the humanity in space, end quotes. Jaku added that Asgardia will start out as a constitutional monarchy, a government with a legislative, executive, and judicial branches. However, it will carry a 512-GB drive preloaded with data selected by Asgardia's first 1.5 million citizens. Quote, maybe the photo of your little cat, or of your neighbor, your mother, or a child, whatever comes to your mind. This will be for as long as Asgardia exists. In other words, forever, end quotes. That's a quote from Ashurbeli. Although Asgardia-1 will slow down in Earth's upper atmosphere and burn up within about 5 years, Igor Ashurbeli said this citizen data will be copied to any future Asgardian satellites, and the spacecraft that go to, quote, the moon and anywhere else in the universe, Asgardia will be there, end quotes. Ashurbeli said the first 100,000 people to be verified through a 4-stage process will each get 300 kilobytes of space on the drive, which is less than 1 frame of a typical DVD video, by the way. The next 400,000 citizens will each get 200 kilobytes, and the final million just get that little 100 kilobytes of space. As part of the verification process, candidate citizens have until June 18th to vote yes or abstain from voting on a new and preliminary constitution. If they vote, they'll be permitted to upload their data to Asgardia-1 before the launch this summer. Quote, without this constitution, we would be a fake nation, a sophisticated computer game, and this is not what we want, end quotes, said Ashurbeli, who will be Asgardia's head of nation until a means of electing a leader is determined. He continued, quote, we want to build a serious, legitimate, independent first space nation, which will be recognized by the Earth states and the United Nations, and which is facing towards space in its development, end quotes. And here's where that expected controversy comes in. Writer Mark Harris, who works for Motherboard, noted that the United Nations might decline to bestow that recognition. Business Insider previously contacted the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Yup, it's real. It's UNOOSA, a great Google. He wanted clarification on whether current space laws would permit the existence of a space nation. But UNOOSA, its representatives, they didn't answer that query. Instead, they directed them to the text of 5 United Nations treaties that govern activities in outer space. Franz von der Donk, a space law expert at the University of Nebraska in the United States, said last year that, quote, as long as nobody's going into space, you can have as many signatures as you want, but you're not going to be a state, end quotes. It was also noted that storing private data in space might eventually open up legal and ethical issues for Asgardia. The Constitution, for example, references, quote, the immunity of commercial secrets, end quotes. and allows the creation of its own laws. Mark Sundahl, a professor of space law at Cleveland Marshall College of Law, said that this could allow Asgardia to create domestic laws, quote, to protect their nationals from any subpoenas requesting bank information, end quotes, and that if this did come to pass, it would, quote, become a rogue banking nation, end quotes. In short, Asgardian citizens might be able to form a nation of space pirates. Business Insider contacted a press representative for Asgardia with questions about these and other issues, but there was no immediate receipt of response. For Asgardia's launch, however, the satellite will be bound to United States law because NanoRacks and Orbital ATK are American companies, and they're launching aboard a NASA-funded mission. The Asgardia-1 satellite is a small beginning for the proto-nation. Its founders eventually want to put people on a craft that will serve as a foothold for habitation. Quote, we'll start small, and eventually people will be going there and working and having their own rules and regulations. This facility will become an independent nation, end quotes, said Jakku. No public details exist yet as to what the early colony might look like, how big it will be, or what expenses it will incur. However, building space stations of any size or kind and putting people on them, that's a very, very expensive proposition. The football field-size International Space Station, for example, took 18 nations and about $100 billion to build. Meanwhile, the cheapest ride to orbit today, that's SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. Those rides cost anywhere between $43 million and $65 million per launch. Timothy Wilde, an Asgardia spokesperson, previously told Business Insider it would not disclose the organization's funding plans or levels, but claimed that Igor Asher-Bailey had put forth a substantial amount of money via his company, Aerospace International Research Center, to get the Asgardia project going. Jakku and Asgardia's organizers have drawn plenty of criticism, and they've been compared to the fizzling Mars 1 project. That was the effort to set astronauts down on the Red Planet. Multiple investigations suggested lacking funding, manpower, and expertise to pull off this feat. However, Jakku and Timothy Wilde pointed out that trying to form a first space nation a couple of 100 miles above Earth is different than trying to colonize Mars. Quote, anyone who tries out-of-the-box things is initially ridiculed, end quotes. Everything that's amazing, quote, starts with a crazy idea, said Jakku. He continues, after a while, science fiction becomes science fact. And this is an idea which is just being initiated, end quotes. And for purposes of disclosure, Dave Mosier, who writes this, notes, the author of this post registered as a citizen of Asgardia as part of his reporting. Cool. And here at ufo-headline-news.com, Inception Radio Network, we will keep you posted on Asgardia. And so, gentle listeners, we come to the end of Off the Beaten Path, that weekend edition of the UFO Headline News here at Inception Radio Network. And here's the part where I get to remind you that the UFO Headline News is now proud to say we're on YouTube. Yep, you can hear us and find links to all the stories. Check it out. But right now, we gotta bounce because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to UFO Headline News Weekend Edition Off the Beaten Path. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.